The winter had frozen rivers solid and silenced the birds. But inside David Harlow's house, the cold was more than weather. He knelt by the north wall, knife in hand, scraping ice that crept through the plaster like a living thing.
Third night this week. The walls are weeping frost.
He straightened and looked out the window. In the distance, Michael Reeves' house glowed with impossible warmth against the bitter dark.
How is that place so warm? He's got nothing but those strange mud walls. We burn half a cord a night and still freeze.
He pulled on his frozen coat. His wife asked where he was going. He didn't answer.
I am going to find out how Michael Reeves keeps his house warm.
The wind cut like a blade, but he stepped out into the snow. But to understand why, we must go back 3 months, to when the whole town laughed at him. 3 months earlier, autumn light slanted through the hardwoods. Michael Reeves worked alone, his hands deep in moss. He peeled it in thick mats, packing it into a wooden cart. The forest was his warehouse.
This will seal the walls tight. The old-timers knew what they were doing.
When the cart was full, he set off toward town, the load swaying with each rut. At the general store, David Harlow leaned on the railing, a cup of coffee steaming in the cold air.
What in God's name, Reeves? You got yourself a load of swamp salad. You gonna stuff a mattress with that. Insulation. That swamp decoration. Next you'll be tiling your roof with lily pads.
Laughter spread along the porch. David slapped his leg.
Let 'em laugh. Come February, they'll be knocking on my door.
He returned to his home site with cartload after cartload of forest moss, piling it high beside the unfinished walls. The double log walls had a wide cavity between them. Michael fed armful after armful into the gap. He packed it tightly, compressing the dry moss until it stood firm as thick batting.
Michael, are you certain this will keep us warm? It looks like a beaver dam.
It will. Moss breathes better than anything man-made. It stops the draft, passes the damp.
And what of mold? David warned it will stink by spring.
David doesn't know what the first settlers here did. Clay seals out rain. The moss inside stays dry.
He turned back to the wall, hands finding their rhythm, packing another armful deep. The work went on past dark, the pile of moss shrinking as the walls thickened. By sunrise, half the house stood stuffed with forest floor. The clay mix waited. Michael mixed the clay himself, shovel, turning gray earth into a thick, smooth paste in the wooden trough. He lifted a trowel and began to spread the mixture over the packed moss, sealing every gap. Passing townsfolk slowed to watch. The whispering started before he'd finished the first wall.
Look at that. Reeves is frosting his cake with mud and calling it a wall.
Michael didn't look up, his trowel moving steady.
He knows what he's doing. The walls will be warm and dry. You'll see.
Warm? He's built a mushroom cellar. It'll rot before Christmas.
When the last seam was closed, the house stood sealed in a skin of gray clay, ugly to the world but airtight. No draft could pass. The chinking was complete. Michael stepped back and wiped his hands. The town had laughed. Now the house would speak. That evening, the fire burned steady in the hearth. No draft stirred the candle flames. Elizabeth ran her palm across the clay-sealed wall. It was not cold.
Michael, the wall is warm. I can feel the heat beneath the clay.
Michael set down the trowel and stepped closer, his expression calm.
The moss holds the fire's warmth. The clay breathes, so no damp builds up.
He pointed to the seam. The gray clay was firm, but behind it, the moss remained dry and airy. That night, they slept without the whistle of wind through cracks. The silence was a luxury. By morning, the windows had not frosted inside. Elizabeth touched the wall again and smiled.
Not a single cold draft. I didn't realize how much the old walls leaked.
Proof enough for us. But the town will need a colder night to believe.
The first true cold snap of the season arrived. Temperature plummeted well below freezing. Ice crystals bloomed on uninsulated window panes across the village. Inside Michael's house, a single log kept the hearth glowing steady. Elizabeth read by the fire, a shawl loose on her shoulders. Across the road, David Harlow sat shivering by his own stove. A candle flame flickered in a relentless draft.
Another log on the fire, Sarah. This cold is eating us alive. I am burning twice the wood.
He fed the stove until the iron glowed orange, but the chill never left the room. Frost crept through the walls. Morning came cold and clear. Michael met David on the frozen street with an easy greeting.
Good morning, David. Cold enough for you?
Your place is half the size of mine. Smaller space holds heat easier. It's just physics.
Michael only smiled and shrugged, not bothering to argue. He knew the real test was still coming.
He knew his own walls bled warmth, but pride was a stubborn thing. He'd freeze before admitting it.
A week of steady rain followed, the kind that soaks into everything. Water dripped from eaves and ran down the clay-sealed walls. David watched from his window, a grim satisfaction growing. If ever the moss would rot, it would be now. He pulled on his coat and crossed the muddy road to Michael's door, jaw set.
Reeves, I bet that swamp stuffing of yours is sprouting mushrooms by now. Let's see it.
Come in, David. Pick a seam.
Michael pried loose a section of clay and pulled back the moss behind it. The moss was bone-dry, smelling faintly of the forest floor. No trace of rot or dampness.
Dry? How can it stay dry with all this rain? It's only a matter of time. Nothing stays dry forever in a wall.
Michael closed the door on the rain and the man's stubbornness. The moss had spoken for itself. Days later, Elizabeth climbed into the dusty attic, sorting through old trunks left by the previous owner. Beneath a folded quilt, her fingers touched leather. She pulled out a worn journal, cover embossed with settler's record.
A settler's journal. This must be from the 40s.
She read aloud a passage. Winter of 44. The cold would have killed us without the moss chinking. We packed every gap with dried moss and sealed it with river clay. She turned the page. A crude diagram showed a cross-section of a log wall, with moss stuffed between timbers, clay smeared over it.
This is exactly what Michael has done. The first settlers used moss and clay to survive.
She hurried down the ladder, journal clutched to her chest, and found Michael by the hearth.
Michael, look, a settler's record. They used moss chinking, just like ours. We've revived their method.
They knew a truth we forgot. This journal is proof, but the town won't believe old paper over their own eyes. Best to let the winter do the convincing. When the cold kills, they'll listen.
Winter tightened its grip. Snow fell in dry, windless flakes across the valley, and the temperature sank lower each night. Inside, the fire burned low, but the room stayed warm. Elizabeth's knitting needles clicked quietly in the hearth's glow. Through the frosted window, Michael watched the neighbors' chimneys belching heavy black smoke into the iron-gray sky.
They're burning 3 times the wood we do. The difference is in these walls.
Michael, perhaps we should show David the journal. It might finally open his stubborn eyes.
Not yet. He's not ready to see. It'd be a gift he'd throw back in our faces. Let him feel the full cold first. Then the truth won't need a journal to be believed.
All through early winter, the pattern held. Michael's woodpile barely shrank while neighbors hauled extra cords each week. Suspicion grew among the townsfolk. They noticed the steady warmth behind his strange clay walls.
They whisper, but they still think it's luck. The real cold will decide who's right.
The thaw came sudden. Icicles dripping, snow turning to slush. The air smelled of wet earth, not mold. David sniffed with grim satisfaction.
I knew it. That swamp stench is finally waking up.
David, that's the smell of spring mud, not my walls.
He tapped the clay seam with his knuckles. It was solid, dry, and rang faintly like a tight drum.
You can't hide rot forever. I've smelled this before.
Michael only smiled, unshaken by the theatrical accusations.
A man can't even trust his own nose anymore. Sarah would be waiting in the cold, saying nothing. Her silence was louder than any shout he'd ever heard.
The thaw passed, but David's pride remained, now splintering at the edges where the cold crept through. The moss, as always, stayed dry and sweet. But his stubbornness was beginning to cost more than just wood. The deep, cold front arrived without warning, temperatures plunging to levels unseen in decades. The outdoor thermometer read 40 below. Even the trees groaned in the biting wind. Inside Michael's house, he added a single log to the fire, and the room remained comfortably warm. Elizabeth, by the fire, opened the journal to a passage she had marked. She read, "In the winter of 1850, the cold killed cattle in their barns, and people huddled in their cabins froze to death."
This is that kind of winter, Michael. The worst the settlers ever saw.
Outside, David was returning from a supply run, his beard already stiff with frost.
He looked at his own chimney, barely puffing, and then at Michael's, with its steady plume of warm smoke. The cold felt biblical, but the truth was simple. The swamp decor was winning.
He stomped the snow off his boots and went inside. But the image of Michael's glowing windows burned in his mind. Inside his own house, David jammed rags into window cracks and hung wool blankets over the doors.
This should hold. A bit of cloth and a good fire. No need for swamp magic.
But the wind found every gap, and by morning, ice had formed on the inside of the glass, thick as a man's palm. His wife coughed behind him, wrapped in every quilt they owned, the sound raw and rattling.
That cough scared him more than the cold, more than admitting he was wrong.
Outside, he saw Michael chatting easily with another man, his breath not even frosty in the biting air.
How can he stand there smiling while we freeze? It's not fair.
A neighbor passing by gestured toward Michael's house and said what everyone was thinking.
I told you before, it's swampland nonsense. It'll rot the whole house come spring.
The neighbor walked on. David stood alone in the cold, his own words sounding hollow, even to himself. That evening, the sky turned iron gray, and the wind began to howl with a sound the valley had not heard in generations.
Michael, listen to this. The wind blew so hard it splintered barns, and the cold crept into every home that lacked tight chinking.
The journal page showed a sketch of a cabin half buried in snow, with the caption, "Those who sealed with moss lived."
Then we'll be ready. I'll reinforce the seams tonight.
While Michael mixed a fresh batch of clay, the town's meeting hall filled with worried faces. People boarded windows and stockpiled fuel, whispering about the winter of 1850.
Panic won't keep you warm. A solid fire and good wool will.
A woman suggested lining walls with straw or moss, and David snorted.
Moss is tinder. You'll set your house ablaze, or fill it with rot.
The meeting adjourned with no plan. Outside, the storm gathered, and Michael's house stood sealed tight, waiting. The blizzard hit before dawn, a solid wall of white that erased the village. Wind screamed through the valley like a living thing, clawing at every shack. Inside Michael's home, the fire crackled softly. Elizabeth sewed extra blankets while Michael checked the seams, his fingers tracing the warm clay. Across the road, David Harlow's house was dark and cold. Snow had drifted against the door, sealing it shut. Inside, frost crept across the ceiling in fern-like patterns, growing thicker by the hour. The stove glowed red, but the room would not warm. His wife, Sarah, huddled with the children under every quilt they owned, her cough now a deep rattle that shook her thin frame.
The woodpile is nearly gone. Another night like this and the fire dies. We'll freeze.
He fed the last split logs into the stove, but the cold chewed through them faster than they could burn.
Sarah, I've got no more wood. The kindling's gone. I don't know what to do. Michael's house is warm. He has plenty of wood left. I could ask, but after everything I said.
Outside, the wind howled, and the temperature dropped still lower. The house groaned as ice expanded in the cracks. The storm had raged 3 days now. Time blurred in the cold. The house felt like a tomb. Sarah's cough was a constant rasp, the children's sobs muffled by frost-thickened blankets.
They're dying. My pride is killing them.
He fed the last piece of furniture into the stove, a chair leg. The flames licked it, then faded. Glancing out the snow-streaked window, He saw Michael's house glowing like a beacon in the whiteout.
He was right. All along, he was right, and I was too proud to see.
A tear froze on Sarah's cheek as she looked up at him. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything.
I am going to get help. I'll swallow my pride or die trying.
He moved toward the door, his movements slow with cold and shame. The handle was iced shut. He forced it open, and the blizzard swallowed him whole. The wind hit him like a wall of ice, stealing his breath before he could take a step. He waded into snow waist deep, each step a battle against the drift and the biting cold.
Just 100 yards for Sarah. For the children, move.
Through the white curtain, a faint glow pulsed. Michael's house, warm and alive. He fixed his eyes on that light and stumbled forward, frost already sealing his beard to his coat.
Please, let him open the door.
The wind screamed, trying to push him back, but he leaned against it, one boot after another. He fell once, face into the snow, and for a moment the dark was quieter than the storm.
Get up. Get up now, or you'll never rise again.
He rose and staggered on. The light was closer now, but the storm fought every inch. His hand slapped against the rough wood of Michael's door. The snow had drifted against it, but the warmth from within was palpable.
He couldn't bring himself to knock. His knuckles were frozen, but the greater paralysis was inside.
Instead, his legs buckled. He slid down the doorframe and slumped against the wood with a heavy thud. Inside, Michael paused by the hearth. The sound was not a knock. It was the weight of a body landing. He opened the door against the drift. Snow burst in, revealing a half-frozen man. David looked up, his beard caked with ice, eyes hollow with shame and exhaustion. No words passed. Michael simply bent down, hooked an arm under David's, and hauled him across the threshold. The storm howled in protest as Michael kicked the door shut, sealing out the white death. Elizabeth rushed forward, but Michael shook his head. Not now. He led David to the fire, wrapped a blanket around him, and let the silence hold.
I need your help, Michael. My family. They're freezing. Your walls work. I mocked you, and I was wrong.
The confession felt heavier than the snow piling outside.
I've got dry moss stored in the barn. Clay by the well. We'll chink your house tonight.
He said it without triumph, just the plain words of a neighbor who had been waiting to help.
David, look at this. It's a settler's journal. They used moss and clay to survive winters like this one.
David took the journal, his frost-nipped fingers tracing the faded ink.
Every joke about swamp decor echoed in his head. This wasn't madness. It was lost knowledge, and he had been the fool.
It doesn't matter who was right. Your family needs warmth. Let's get moving.
He pulled on his coat and filled a canvas sack with dry moss from the lean-to. David rose, the blanket falling away. His pride would take longer to recover than his body. They trudged through the whiteout, the sack of dry moss heavy on Michael's shoulder. Inside David's house, the cold struck like a blow. Sarah's cough echoed in the dark kitchen.
Pull out that chair stuffing. It's not stopping anything. We pack the moss tight, see?
He grabbed a handful of dry moss and wedged it into the gap where frost had blown through, then handed the sack to David.
Like this. I never thought of moss as more than forest trash.
They worked side by side, packing seam after seam. Then Michael smeared clay to seal the moss from moisture. The wind still screamed outside, but inside, the drafts began to die. One by one, Sarah pulled the children closer, a thin smile breaking as the room softened. David watched his wife's face ease. The guilt was heavy, but the relief was heavier.
Michael, I owe you more than I can ever repay. You saved my family.
By morning, the blizzard had weakened. Inside David's house, Sarah cooked over a warm stove, her cough a distant memory. David opened the door and found a neighbor already standing there, staring at the steady chimney smoke. The man gestured toward the steady smoke and asked the question everyone was desperate to voice.
Moss and clay. Michael Reeves showed me. It's free, and it saved my family.
Soon others gathered, and David led them to Michael's barn, where he was already handing out dried moss and canvas sacks.
Take what you need. Pack it tight. Seal with clay. The forest provides.
Within an hour, the whole block was at work. Women mixing clay, men stuffing moss into every drafty seam they could find.
I called it swamp decor. I was wrong. Michael's way saved us.
He said it loudly, so all could hear, his shame now a badge of gratitude. Michael only worked on, quietly giving away the secret that had once drawn laughter. His victory was silent and complete. The brutal winter dragged on, storm after storm, but in the moss-chinked houses, families gathered by warm hearths. David and Michael worked side by side, no longer adversaries, hauling moss and sealing walls for anyone in need.
We've gone from swamp mockers to moss soldiers, Michael. Never thought I'd say that.
Not a single life was lost to the cold in that village. The swamp decoration had become a quiet legend. Children pressed their hands against the warm clay seams, feeling the heat held inside.
The old journal was right. The oldest wisdom often costs nothing.
Through the frosted window, Michael watched the village, every chimney sending up smoke against the white hills. He felt no pride, only a deep sense of rightness. The forest had given, and the people had listened. When winter finally loosened its grip, the moss-chinked houses stood as proof of what had been almost forgotten. The laughter had faded, replaced by gratitude carved in clay and moss. Spring breathed warmth into the valley. On a hillside overlooking the village, Michael and Elizabeth stood side by side. Smoke rose gently from the moss-chinked chimneys, no longer a battle against the cold, but a comfortable sign of life. The journal, tucked under Elizabeth's arm, held the proof of a forgotten knowledge now alive again.
The settlers knew. Now the whole valley knows. Moss and clay are free, and they saved us.
They laughed once. Now their children will grow up warm because of swamp decoration.
He took her hand and looked out at the village. No victory speech, no grand display. Just a quiet certainty. The old ways had returned, not through force, but through one man's stubborn belief and a forest's quiet gift. A tradition that had been sleeping in the soil itself, waiting for someone to remember. Michael's smile was small, not for pride, but for the simple truth he had always known. The oldest wisdom costs nothing, if you only remember to listen.